Hello friends, in this video we are going to see how to write a mains answer using one of the question which was asked in GS paper 3 2020. So using this video we will be seeing two things. One, how to prepare a mains answer, and two, how to structure a mains answer so that it can be presented in a better fashion during the mains. So let us go to the video. I'll begin this video by saying that if I had written this mains 2020, I would not have been able to write an answer as elaborate as we are going to discuss. Not everyone in the examination hall will be able to pull off points in the way which we are going to discuss. So if we have written fewer points also, or if we have written some other answer also, this examination of UPSC gives you an equitable chance of clearing as well. So this is not the only way of writing answer. This is one of the way of writing answer and one of the way of preparation for answer. So with that disclaimer, I will start this video. The question that we are going to discuss is the question of 2020 paper 3. Explain the intergenerational and intragenerational issues of equity from the perspective of inclusive growth and sustainable development. If you see this question, it has it is a confusing question, but it has 4 parts. For example, it has this intragenerational. So it has this intragenerational, intergenerational. So this is one part, this is 2, and then there is one part called as inclusive growth, which is 3, and then there is another part which is called as sustainable development, which is 4. So addressing each of the key terms, so these are the 4 issues or 4 key terms in this question, and addressing each of these key terms is very important for getting good marks in UPSC. This is a broader framework. So this is a broader framework. Many other points can be given in this question. This is not the only answer, because I have designed it in a way so that it can be presented in a mains paper. So this question is about 10 marks. So for writing 10 marks, how many points can be written in that page is a constraint which we have to take into account. We can write, for example, inclusive growth, intragenerational equity issue, we can write 10 points. But the thing will be that the paper size will be so less that you cannot accommodate all the 10 points, because we have to address the other issues also. So while addressing other issues, the paper size might reduce, and hence I have given I have given equitable distribution even in the answer writing. So first we will go to inclusive growth. Economic growth that is fairly distributed across society. That is the point. So it is distributed across the society by creating opportunity for all. So what do they mean by this? In a simple sense is that, for example, in 1990, so in 1990 the GDP of India, so the GDP of India was around $300 billion. So around 1990 the GDP of India was $300 billion, which has risen now, for example, in 2020 to around $2.7 trillion. And as you might be aware, we are aspiring to be a superpower which will have a $5 trillion economy by the time we reach 2024. But if you see, this increase in GDP is not the only scale in which a society's development has to be measured. Rather, how this is distributed, how this is distributed is a very essential concept in terms of growth of a country. So if you happen to see, that is the point which this inclusive growth addresses, and hence this can be discussed under 2 points. So we can talk about the weaker sections. That is, while development takes place, it will take place for the broader section or the elite section of a society, and many of the marginalized section of the society will be left out. And the marginalized section of a society in India can be the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, women, transgenders, and many other things. But in this, I would like to, so you can talk about any of the weaker section which has been left out and how they can be included. But I will, for example, in this answer, I will talk about women. So, for example, how you have to bring in an inclusive society is by distributing the growth. And how do you distribute the growth is one method is that improving opportunity for the marginalized section. That is, improving opportunity means improving the skill or improving the education. So improving the education of women, you can, because when you improve education of women, they will be able to get a college degree, and once they get the college degree, they can be able to participate in the economy and they can have their share of growth and development. And for this, what we can think about is that, for example, the National Family Health Survey. The National Family Health Survey says, so how do you bring that? What are all the issues? One issue is that the National Family Health Survey says only 40% of India has toilet facilities. So when you have only 40% as toilet facilities, the dropout rate among women, increases. And in order to reduce this dropout rate, the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan can be a very important tool for, in the sense, bringing. So how do you bring intragenerational inclusive growth? You can use Swachh Bharat to improve the opportunities for women in India to get better education, and through that they can participate in the development. So next point, so formal versus informal. If you happen to see, in India, the formal employment is 10%, informal employment is 90%. What is the meaning of informal employment is that these people who are in the unorganized sector, they do not have pension, they do not have proper health care, they do not have proper social security net. And how do you, so for example, so how can we bring better inclusive growth is by providing insurance cover for the unorganized sector. So when you are providing insurance cover, accident cover, and many other social security net, so you can talk about the social security net, which can provide these informal sections a better inclusive or better chance for an inclusive growth. Next, so then third point you can talk about, for example, rural-urban divide, rural versus urban divide. And the economy which I described, which is the $2.7 trillion GDP of India, it is supposed that nearly 60% of that GDP happens to come by urban areas. So that means that the rural areas have very less GDP. And when they have very less GDP, it is not possible for an inclusive growth. And hence what you can think about is that how people in the rural area can be increased or can be brought into the ambit of growth by MNREGA or other social security or social welfare measures or providing housing schemes, in for low income groups in rural areas, and better infrastructure, improving infrastructure in rural areas. Through all these methods, you can bring in equitable distribution or inclusive growth. But see, 3 points. But think of on all these lines. You can even talk about MSMEs. So large corporations are given loan, but MSMEs are not. But to bring in inclusive growth, you have to give MSMEs their due share as well. So this intergenerational. So intergenerational equity. So intergenerational equity, you can talk about, for example, reduction in inequality. So what is the intergenerational means? From this generation, let us assume the generation which is present now to a generation which is going to come in the next 30 years. So in the next 30 years, according to an Oxfam report says that in India nearly 70% of the wealth, so in India 70% of the wealth is held by the top 10 percentile of the people. That is, the top 10 percentile of the society holds 70% of the wealth. So when intergenerational equity has to be brought about, this has to be reduced. So a society designed for reducing intergenerational inequality will be a better model of growth. So second we can talk about, for example, reducing class inequality. Reducing class inequality. What is this reducing class inequality? Is that now India is a society which is very much based on caste, but now it was based on caste, but now it is there is a paradigm shift towards class. So when a society which is caste based becomes class based, we have to design welfare measures for addressing that issue in the future generation. For example, we can think about the national health scheme of, for example, in UK. So this was started in the 1950s after the World War II. The National Health Scheme, for example, gives health coverage to all the sections of the United Kingdom. How they have designed it is through the route of government, and hence such schemes, that is health care for all. So health care for all will bring in an inclusive growth, or it will address the intergenerational equity issue in inclusive growth points also. But next, addressing the next issue. So what is sustainable development? As you might be aware, sustainable development is development that meets the needs. So meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation. And this is a definition given by the Brundtland Commission in the 1987. And we will usually go, when sustainable development question is asked, we will think about climate change and or carbon reduction. But I think we can diversify this answer in the following ways. For example, we will first address the intragenerational. So first we will address intragenerational as we did in the previous question. So intragenerational, you can talk about, so within the generation we can talk about the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You can, in this, how do you talk about means, in this we can talk about the intended nationally determined contribution. What is this intended nationally determined contribution means? That if you see in the history of this world, the countries which have got developed have been able to, or have polluted or have released more carbon dioxide into the air than the countries like India and China. because India and China came to the development at a later stage, and hence if you see, the contribution of the developed countries is more rather than India. So what equitable distribution means is that in countries like India, which is having still a lot of poverty, cannot cut down on, for example, thermal power plants at a very drastic rate for reduction of carbon dioxide, because poverty reduction also happens to be one of the key important issues in India. So how intra-generational equity can be established or sustainable development can be established is by having this United Nations Framework Convention, where you have intended nationally determined contribution, where voluntarily a country will come forward and give the way in which they will reduce carbon dioxide. But countries which are developed, United States of America, Europe, or the countries Australia, New Zealand, these countries can, Denmark, many other the Nordic countries, they can come forward and they can reduce more. But India can be given a little more time because we have this point of reduction of poverty. But again, we need not stop here. So we can talk about biodiversity. What is this biodiversity means? If you see, India, not only India, the world has so many species. It is not only the humans who are there. So how do you establish sustainable development in intra-generational equity means other species which are getting extinct, because of this action of humans, have to be protected as well. For example, we protect tigers, so tiger protection scheme, so Project Tiger. So we are having this, or Project Elephant, we are having this project where we will be protecting other species to give this intra-generational sustainable development. And then I think we can even talk about taxation. So sustainable development is supposed to be talking about environment, but sustainable development, how you have this intra-generational sustainable development is by having, for example, a progressive taxation. What does this progressive taxation means? Having higher direct tax rather than indirect tax. So having a tax directly collected from, for example, personal income tax or corporate tax more than the taxes on maybe example petrol, diesel, will have a progressive taxation structure in India or the world, and that will lead to a sustainable development for intra-generational equity. In this intergeneration, first we can talk about carbon dioxide reduction. So by the time we reach 2100, if we are going at the same pace of increasing carbon dioxide, there is a chance that 2-degree increase in temperature will happen and increase in sea level, and that is going to be a detrimental effect for the future generation. And hence it is the responsibility of human generation which is present now to reduce this carbon emission, so that the future generation does not suffer because of the acts which are being done now. And you can next talk about resource. In this resource, we can talk about many resources, but I will take water. For example, in states like Punjab and Haryana, the utilization of groundwater. So groundwater utilization in these states is higher, more than 100%. That is, you are using more than you can replenish the groundwater resource, and hence this is causing a lot of issues. So how you address it? Same, reuse, reduce, recycle. So we can talk about these three things in order to address the intergenerational equity for sustainable development. Again, here we can talk about taxation. I feel we can talk about, how do you talk about means in terms of fiscal deficit. So what is this fiscal deficit? If you mean is that when you do not have proper resource, or when you do not have enough resource for this budget, you borrow for increasing your spending. So if we keep borrowing our spending, or if we keep borrowing or if we keep borrowing for financing the deficit which is coming in the present generation, giving back the money which we have borrowed will fall on the next generation, and hence it is the responsibility of this present generation to have a proper functioning budget, so that we will reduce the amount which is borrowed and will have a less burden on the generation which is going to come. So these are the points, and you can have many more points as well. So how do you structure this answer? So how do you structure this answer? This is a 10-mark question. So in the UPSC 10-mark question, we usually or you have to write 2 pages. So 1 and 2 pages. So how do you structure this answer? Means first you can talk about inclusive growth. So first inclusive growth, 1 point you can talk about. In this inclusive growth, you can talk about A, intra, and B, inter. And see, this is how you arrange the points. So intra-generational, when you write, you can talk about 3 points. The page will actually be enough for only doing these 3 points. And then next you can talk about sustainable development. So same way, sustainable development, you can write the definition here, and again you can talk about A, intra, and then inter. Again you can address this using the 3 points which we have now discussed, and then we will conclude. So if you happen to see, we can write many points, but having this structure, this framework, this definition, or 3 points each for addressing each thing which each keyword they have asked, will give a better mark. So this is how we can prepare an answer for mains, and this is how we can represent an answer in mains. So next videos we will see more of how answer structure can be done in a better way. Thank you.